Monster Hunter is way over 2 decades old at this point, and there are a lot of games in the series' vast history across a variety of gaming platforms. With Monster Hunter Wilds in development, many players are jumping back onto various Monster Hunter titles, and I'm sure many will have asked themselves this question, and that is, including people who haven't played Monster Hunter before, and that question is, what Monster Hunter game should I play in 2024? In this video, I will be running through what games you should consider playing in the Monster Hunter franchise, and as always guys, if you do enjoy the video, please do smash that like button and consider subscribing for a lot more Monster Hunter content. So before delving into the recommendations, it's crucial to understand the evolution of the Monster Hunter games and where it started out. Monster Hunter started out on the PlayStation 2 before it would broaden its horizon with handheld consoles like the PSP and 3DS, and then through up to the current generation of consoles, which is of course the Xbox Series X/S, PS5 and Nintendo Switch. Each of these iterations building upon the foundations laid out by its predecessors, as you would expect. So, you may be asking, what games do I have to choose from? While there are many games in the franchise, two of the main factors that I think will steer this answer are what consoles you have access to, although this might not be a question if you're open to buying a new console for one of these games, and also what kind of experience are you looking for. So kicking it off, we have the most common game many players are returning to, as well as being introduced to for the first time, and that is, surprise surprise, Monster Hunter World. So Monster Hunter World is the second most recent entry in the series, and even today is still a phenomenal standout title in the Monster Hunter franchise as well as gaming as a whole. It has a very strong console range from the Xbox One up to the Series X, as well as the PS4 and PS5. The game is also on PC as well. It did come out a bit later in its life cycle for the actual game, but now it is fully up to date on all platforms, so regardless of which one you choose, for the most part it will be the same experience, bar a few limitations like mods, frame rates and resolutions. The game itself has breathtaking visuals and a very expansive, semi-open world style of map design, and it also offers a very streamlined gameplay loop with a very strong set of mechanics to work through, and this is probably one of the titles in the series where it really pushed for that quality of life upgrade, and if you do end up playing some of the older games, you will definitely notice these changes. The game itself is quite accessible, yet very deep in terms of its mechanics, and this can vary from weapon to weapon, but for the most part there is a decent learning curve across the board for both the weapons in the game, the skill sets, and the monsters themselves. And in terms of monsters, they have a very good moveset, and this also is reflected in the Hunter with a very engaging combat system, where the Hunters have a very broad moveset, and once again this will range from weapon to weapon, but for the most part across the board they did a really good job with really fleshing out each of the weapons as well as what the monsters have on the offense against you. There is also the Palico system, as with most of the games in the series, to help expand on that combat flow, where they can give you various buffs and boosts throughout the hunt. And then we have the expansive endgame content, and this is really emphasised with the expansion as well, which is called Iceborne, and this is arguably one of the best expansions in the gaming industry. It has loads of content, and especially today if you catch it on sale, it's a phenomenal deal. I think Monster Hunter Endgame as in general across most of the games, if not all of the games, is very well done, and in Iceborne's case especially, there is loads of content to seep your claws into, including new armor and weapons, and of course loads of additional monsters along with new locations. There is a really good difficulty curve in this game as well, so a lot of the new players can easily jump into this title and have a good time, and then over time the monsters will get more difficult, especially when you jump into the Iceborne expansion, but there is enough hunting in the meantime where you can build up those skills to get towards those more tougher monsters and survive. And just to add on to this difficulty curve, multiplayer is made very easy in this game. There are multiple lobbies where you can jump into a 16-player lobby and find a team in there, and you can also shoot an SOS during a quest where someone can respond to your SOS flare. And just to expand on this point, it's kind of related. There is still a very strong player base for Monster Hunter World, and given Monster Hunter Wilds just got announced not too long ago, a lot of people are jumping back onto this game for all of the platforms, so I'm sure you will probably find someone to play with quite easily, but if not, there is a Discord that I have, and I'm sure there's many other YouTuber Discords where you can jump in there and find a Monster Hunter party to play with. And especially with my Discord, I can vouch for that one, as it's pretty much built up on the foundation of a load of Monster Hunter players. So hopefully I do see you guys in there. But getting back on track, finally we have the Clutch Claw. So this is a very fun, additional and unique mechanic that you won't find in any of the other Monster Hunter games, and this allows for increased move sets, with all the weapons having a special move to some degree that you can chain in the Clutch Claw into your combat flow, and it also increases the player's mobility, so it's giving you a boost in both combat and map traversal. You will notice that with the two most recent Monster Hunter games, there is a unique tool in both of those games, with the second of those two tools being the wire bug from Monster Hunter Rise. And that brings us on to that phenomenal entry in the Monster Hunter franchise. So as I just mentioned, the wire bug, we'll pick it up from there. So the first reason as to why you should pick up Monster Hunter Rise in 2024 is the wire bug. So this is very similar to the Clutch Claw, although it takes away the damage altering effects of the Clutch Claw, which you will learn quite quickly when you jump into the Iceborne expansion if you do go and pick up Monster Hunter World. And instead of that type of mechanic, it gives you a Spider-Man-like grappling tool that has, of course it has its usage limits as you'd expect, but it is also just as fun as you'd expect such a mechanic to be. It allows you to zip around the map and around monsters while also increasing the player's moveset with special wire bug attacks that are unique to each weapon, and this is a very cool tool to have in a game like this, as the maps are quite expansive and the monsters' movesets are quite strong as well, so it is nice to have that increased versatility. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong of course, I think a lot of players do prefer the wire bug over the Clutch Claw, as there's no mandatory need to have to use the wire bug as there is with the Clutch Claw, especially in the later game for Monster Hunter World. But of course, this will come down to what you prefer, as they do have very different uses. So if you do end up playing both, definitely, or if you've already played both, definitely let me know down below which one you guys prefer, as I would be interested to see how the divide is split between both players. But jumping back onto why you should pick up Monster Hunter Rise potentially in 2024, we do have the biggest console range here, as it's the same as World in terms of the consoles that World can be played on, but in this case for Rise it can also be played on the Nintendo Switch, which was its native game originally, and then of course it was ported over to the Xbox One, Series SX and PS4 5, as well as PC. Since it was released on the Nintendo Switch, it does take a bit of a hit graphically in comparison to World, which I don't think is a fair comparison, as of course Monster Hunter World was made for the Xbox One, PS4, and then the PC only just emphasised the design style they were going for. But Rise in itself has some fantastic visuals, and the art style is also extremely well done. It is similar to World in terms of its large map designs and its kind of bordering that semi-open world feel, and it also has the enhanced combat, which you won't find as fleshed out in any other game, as of course Rise is the most recent Monster Hunter game as of the making of this video, so here is where the combat is shining and it is absolutely fantastic. There are smaller lobbies in comparison to Monster Hunter World, with 4-player lobbies, but they work as you would expect them to, alongside the returning SOS functionality, which is great to see, as this just encourages that multiplayer and community spirit of helping out each hunter. There is a really good learning curve in this game as well, as you'd expect. I think they've really brushed up on their learning curve for a Monster Hunter title since like Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate and Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate really hit the nail on the head, and I think since then, for the most part, Monster Hunter games have had a good learning curve for most players to be able to jump onto. The combat itself, as I said, is very engaging and fleshed out, it's really well done, and the moveset is once again at its best. And this is for both the hunter and the monster, especially in the monster's case this time due to the addition of the wire bug. I think we did see quite a strong increase to the moves that can be found in each monster, and this of course applies heavily to the returning monsters, where you can see the comparison quite well. The game itself has quite a strong player base on all systems, as you'd expect, given it is the most recent Monster Hunter game, so you should hopefully not have too much trouble finding some people to play with. And then it has a very good Palico and Palamute system, which is expanding on the Palico system from Monster Hunter World, introducing the new Palamute, which is pretty much just a dog instead of a cat, but you don't get the same style of buffs as you would get from the cat, and instead you have the option to ride your Palamute around for that increased speed when you're moving around the map. And you can of course still use them in combat as well, which is great. So you just have that additional gameplay option to work with. And then we do also have the Rampage mode, which is a never before seen mode in a Monster Hunter title, which is practically just a horde mode in essence, and it is quite a good mode. I think there is quite a mixed opinion on this, depending on what type of gameplay you like to get from a Monster Hunter game. Of course, the gameplay loop for the most part is very similar, but the monster's health is different, your attacks, the damage values that you will be putting out are different, given you are fighting a lot of monsters repeatedly, and if you do hate repetition, this might be something that's not for you, but the option is there if you are looking for something to spice up that Monster Hunter gameplay loop. Once again, just like with World, the expansion for this game is fantastic. It's called Sunbreak for Monster Hunter Rise, and it's a very good expansion, and it's very similar to Monster Hunter World in the sense that it's bringing a lot of new monsters, locations, and of course just expanding on the game as a whole. For Monster Hunter Rise's final point, I think this is quite a big one as well, is the portability. So if you do have a Switch, of course that's the only way it can be portable, unless you had one of those weird home console portability kits. If it's on the Switch, you of course have the portability for Monster Hunter Rise, so you can take it on the go, and the only caveat to this is the resolution and frame rate differences, as you would expect, which is pretty impressive given the offering that you're receiving from this game, the amount of content and the graphical style and all the weapons and monsters that you face. It's quite impressive they were able to throw this on a portable system, and the 30 frames per second isn't even that bad, to be honest, so definitely do consider this if portability is a big thing for you and you want to play one of the most recent Monster Hunter games, and like I said, in this case, the most recent Monster Hunter title. This is definitely one worth picking up. Outside of these two entries, of course that being Monster Hunter Rise and World, we fall back into the classic Monster Hunter gameplay loop, which while it is very similar, it's not as newbie friendly as you'd expect, but they do all stand the test of time for the most part. And the most common game that most people will fall back to in the classic selection is Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, or Monster Hunter Double Cross as it is known back in Japan. So with Generations, just like with the other two that I've mentioned on this video, Combat is phenomenal here, as you would expect, with maybe a few moves missing if you are playing this after Monster Hunter World or Rise, which is something you of course should expect if you're going back in the Monster Hunter chronological entries lineup. But for the most part, the combat is very strong here, and one of the reasons that is the case is the introduction of hunter styles and hunter art, which is unique to this Monster Hunter title. This would provide players with unique combat styles that would switch up what moves they have access to, and also of course would introduce new moves alongside the implementation. I'm starting to lose the ability to speak, and it would also bring some powerful special moves to add a unique twist to every hunting experience, only further emphasizing the depth and variety to gameplay that can be found in Monster Hunter titles. One of the more unique aspects of this game is the Prowler mode, which only adds to that unique twist to the gameplay loop, and this allows you to play as a feline companion, which was pretty much the Palico before Palicos, and here the player is able to utilize unique abilities and playstyles, offering a fresh perspective on the traditional gameplay style. And this was a big hit with players, as it's not as limiting as you would expect it to be, given you're not a big hunter. Instead, you're an even smaller entity and you're just a cat fighting big monsters, but it was actually very well done. And of course, there is an absolutely massive range of weapons, armors and monsters, as you would expect from a Monster Hunter game, except in this title it's thrown at you in full force, as Monster Hunter Generations, if you don't know, is the game that was celebrating all the Monster Hunter games that came before, and in doing so brings back a crazy amount of content from those titles, collating them all into one incredible mashup title. So if you are looking for that legacy Monster Hunter game that brings it all together, of course there are little bits missing here and there, but for the most part this does a phenomenal job in creating that little legacy time capsule for the Monster Hunter franchise. Local and online multiplayer still exists here, but there is no SOS function like we see in Rise and World, although that does not take away from the fantastic community and fan base that this game has going for it. And once again, if you are struggling to find someone, there are a lot of areas out on the internet where you can create little groups and find other players that are still playing this game to create parties and go out hunting together. Consoles for this one range from just two, and that's exclusively in the Nintendo lineup, those consoles being the Nintendo Switch and 3DS, but this does come with crossplay, which is pretty good to see for this entry, so it does in a way broaden up the multiplayer range slightly. Unfortunately, I did forget to say this for the other two games, crossplay is not available for World and Rise, but since they are the two most recent Monster Hunter titles, I don't think that would be an issue for those two games. But in Generations, it could potentially be an issue, but I think there are enough players online in the community that are still running lobbies, and of course crossplay will only just help with that issue. For the most part, this game is definitely one worth considering to go back to, and there are two consoles that you can pick from, and I think they are quite common consoles to have in many households, so I'm hoping that you should already have one of these two. If not, I would say if you are a big Monster Hunter fan, it is worth picking up one of these two consoles. And in terms of the Switch, it's still the most up-to-date console for the Nintendo lineup, so that I'm sure there's many other games you can jump onto as well. And then finally, there are two other strong suggestions that I won't go into as much detail for, but they're definitely worth considering picking up if you have one of the consoles that these entries are on. And for the first one, there is only one console it is on, and that is Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate on the 3DS. So this is an absolutely phenomenal entry in the series. This is arguably one of my favourite games in the Monster Hunter franchise, and on the 3DS especially, it's easily my favourite game on the system. There was a strong monster lineup and a range of locations with really good quest progression, and the end game was solid. And this is the game where they really started to focus on quality of life and really expanding on the movement in the game, as well as the movesets for all the weapons. It is also the game where they introduce the Charge Blade and the Insect Glaive, so it is pretty cool to see the actual entry that introduced those weapons, as it has been a very long time since we've gotten a new weapon in a Monster Hunter title, so it's definitely something worth going back to, or even just looking up some gameplay on, as they have changed quite a bit since their introduction, and they're definitely very overpowered in this game, so if you do go back to them, you probably will notice quite a strong power fantasy when you are using these weapons, especially with the Charge Blade. I absolutely loved it in this game, but you do feel like quite a monster, no pun intended, when using those two weapons in this game. But of course that doesn't take away from all the other weapons that you can choose from. And then going back a little bit further, we have Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, which was released on the Wii U and 3DS, and same as before, there is a very good monster lineup. There's a good range of locations, quest progression, the end game's good, but of course there will be a downgrade in combat and movement, but it's still a fantastic game nevertheless, and the location and setting of Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate definitely carries the game a lot. It is the location that's not present in Generations Ultimate, and instead they went with the 3 portable location for that game, which was a bit weird, as the Moga Village in 3 Ultimate is arguably one of my favourites, if not top 3 easily. But it's definitely something worth going back to if you do have a Wii U or 3DS, as I think the vibe in that game is very unique and unmatched. You can't really get something similar to it in any of the newer Monster Hunter games. So if you do go back and check out that title, definitely drop your thoughts on the game down below in this video's comment section, as I would love to see what newer players think of this entry. And the final game on the list for this video is the game that started it all for me, which is Monster Hunter Freedom Unite for the PSP, which offers a similar experience as with 3 Ultimate and 4 Ultimate, but once again at the cost of that natural decline in combat and movement, as you would expect with it being an even older Monster Hunter title. But for the most part, all of these titles will offer a phenomenal endgame and gameplay loop that should definitely not go unnoticed just because they're older Monster Hunter games. So I think for the most part, regardless of which Monster Hunter game you go to, I think all of them are worth picking up for a variety of reasons, and some of them have their unique flair to them. So I wouldn't be shy of going back to a much older Monster Hunter game, as long as you're aware of course, that natural decline in the combat system, the movement system, and hitboxes might be a bit weirder in the original games and the very, very early games, but you do have to, of course, take into account that there were system limitations, so of course, definitely be aware of that. And with that said, guys, that brings us to the end of this video. Let me know down below if you will be jumping back on or picking up any of these games for the very first time, and I look forward to seeing all of your comments. As always guys, a like would be extremely appreciated if you did enjoy the video. It does help out the channel a ton, and subscribe for a lot more Monster Hunter content. Don't forget to join our Discord, link is at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.